Welcome to Patscast. I'm Brad Whitaker. On Thursday, the New England Patriots announced Alex Van Pelt as the franchise's next offensive coordinator and the first under the new Gerard Mayo regime. And this decision really came out of left field. And I'm not talking about Fenway Park, shallow green monster left field. I'm talking about like the Polo Grounds, the center field at the Polo Grounds, 600 feet deep. Nobody saw this coming. The Patriots had interviewed 11 potential candidates that did not include Van Pelt. That's what we knew about heading into Thursday morning. And then out of nowhere, we hear he is going to be the next offensive coordinator. Now, a little bit of background on Van Pelt. He is 56 years old, so a little bit older than the rest of that young coaching staff under Mayo. We know they elevated DeMarcus Covington recently, who's in his late 30s. Van Pelt spent the last 4 years as the offensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns. However, his background is mainly as a quarterbacks coach. He was with the Bills a couple seasons, with the Bucks. He also spent a couple of seasons as the running backs coach for the Packers before going back to the QB coach position in 2014. He stayed in that role for 4 seasons, including the first one in which Aaron Rodgers won his second NFL MVP award. He also spent about a decade as an NFL quarterback with the Buffalo Bills. So certainly has some experience, not just as a coach coaching quarterbacks, but as a quarterback himself and a veteran of the NFL. He took on the same role in Cincinnati for 2 seasons after his time with the Packers, before ultimately being elevated to offensive coordinator in Cleveland. And this past season, Van Pelt did a really great job working with multiple backup quarterbacks before they ultimately settled with Joe Flacco, and they really elevated the resurgence of Flacco and were a playoff team. Took the league by surprise. Cleveland looked very good. They struggled a little bit against that Houston defense in the playoffs, but it was a real surprise what Cleveland was able to achieve with Deshaun Watson going down. Now, it should be noted he was not the play caller in Cleveland. That was their head coach, Kevin Stefanski. However, Van Pelt did call plays in a playoff win over the Steelers back in 2020, or it was actually early 2021, the COVID season with little to no fans in the stands. And they won that game 48-37 in Pittsburgh. And the game really wasn't even that close. Pittsburgh had a bunch of garbage points at the end there, but putting up 48 points in your first game as a play caller, not to mention a playoff game with Baker Mayfield, very impressive. He also called plays in 2021, again, when Stefanski also went down with COVID. They ended up losing that game to the Raiders. Now, it is expected that Van Pelt will be taking the play calling duties in New England in addition to running the offensive operation there. Now, the question that everybody's asking, which we really haven't gotten a clear answer to, although there has been some clarity, is why was Van Pelt fired? After all, Cleveland's offense really surprised a lot of people and really excelled after Deshaun Watson went down, particularly when Joe Flacco took over. Browns were a playoff team. They ranked okay offensively, 16th in yards this past season and 12th in points. Either way, that would be a big improvement for the Patriots, considering they were one of the worst, if not the worst offense in the NFL this past season. So I would even take mediocre at this point, considering they probably will have an elite defense coming back. But rumor has it Stefanski and company in Cleveland were not satisfied with the way Van Pelt had designed plays when Deshaun Watson was healthy before he went down with his season-ending injury. I guess there were not a lot of QB-designed run plays for Watson that they wanted to see more of, and they wanted to go a different direction with Deshaun Watson returning healthy heading into the 2024 NFL season. So I think his firing is not as big of a concern if that rumor is true. So it will be interesting to see what happens in New England. But the question is, what type of offense will the New England Patriots be running now under Alex Van Pelt? It's safe to say things will look a little bit different. He is a West Coast offense kind of guy, which if you're not familiar with the West Coast offense, it has really stood the test of time over the last 4 decades. It was invented by Bill Walsh with the San Francisco 49ers, who thrived under the West Coast offense in the 1980s. It has since evolved a little bit with Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay embracing kind of a different style of the same West Coast offense. Now, Van Pelt embraces more of the old school approach to the West Coast offense, kind of like Mike McCarthy does, kind of like the Aaron Rodgers-led offenses of the last few years. This contrasts a little bit with the Shanahan-McVay style West Coast offense, the more new school version, which incorporates a lot more play action, pre-snap motion, and downfield passing relative to the old school version that Van Pelt and McCarthy and Aaron Rodgers and them have run over the last few years, dating all the way back to Joe Montana and Steve Young with the Bill Walsh 49ers. Now, how is this going to be different from the New England Patriots offense of the last 2.5 decades under Tom Brady, which is basically known as the Erhardt-Perkins offense? They've basically run that every season since Brady arrived, with exception to the Matt Patricia, Joe Judge year, which they tried to incorporate more of the Shanahan style, simplified, new school West Coast offense. It didn't really work, and they kind of slowly moved back to the Brady style offense throughout the season. It is a little different. The Erhardt-Perkins system emphasizes more like option routes for receivers, which you saw Brady, certainly he would change routes pre-snap at the line. It provides a lot more flexibility through a lot of different versatile formations. On the other hand, the West Coast offense prioritizes more like short, precise passes with more of a focus on timing, read progressions, and creating a rhythmic, consistent passing game. Very pass heavy, so that'll certainly be a change of pace from what we've seen in New England the last few years. Now, both the Erhardt-Perkins and the West Coast offense have their similarities. They both seek to efficiently move the ball through the air consistently, while the Erhardt-Perkins offense often achieves adaptability through those option routes with receivers and emphasizes more of a power run, gap scheme game, while the West Coast offense does a little bit more wide zone and achieves control and consistency through more intricate and timing dependent approaches. It's not going to look, if you're not into the X's and O's, it's not going to look drastically different, but it will be different if you are into that sort of stuff. That said, I really wouldn't be surprised to see the Patriots still want to move more in the Shanahan-McVay new school West Coast offense direction, with more wide zone gaps, wide zone schemes, which they have incorporated a lot more over the last few years. I think there's going to be a lot more play actions and bootlegs. And Van Pelt, if you go back and watch the film, which I've been looking at on X over the last 24 hours, he's certainly been really creative in designing plays that emphasize both the old school and new school versions of the West Coast offense. And he's clearly been dying to be a play caller, hasn't had a lot of opportunities, and has shown some success, as mentioned, 48 points in the playoff game against the Pittsburgh Steelers back in 2021. We're really excited, at least I am, to see what Van Pelt can do as a play caller, who certainly earned those duties and hasn't had the opportunities, which he will likely have in New England. Will be able to do it full time, so we could see a whole new side to Van Pelt that we have not seen throughout his tenured coaching career. Now, I think the real question is, who is going to be the quarterback that thrives in this new Alex Van Pelt offensive system? And to those getting excited about the Patriots drafting Jayden Daniels, I think this decreases the chances of them drafting him, considering he was fired in Cleveland for not designing enough run schemes for Deshaun Watson. I'm not saying it won't happen. If they really are impressed with Drake May and Jayden Daniels, whoever falls to number 3 and is not taken at number 2, perhaps they still take him. But considering Alex Van Pelt is there, didn't love what he did with Deshaun Watson, maybe they're not going to want to move in the direction of Jayden Daniels, and they'll have to take a quarterback later in the draft if Drake May is not available. I still think Drake May is probably just as much in the picture if he is available at number 3 overall. But I do think this does highly increase the probability of the team seeking their next quarterback via free agency to either be a short-term solution or a bridge to the Patriots quarterback of the future. So perhaps in a month, they really go heavy after Kirk Cousins. That would be really exciting because he is the best available quarterback on the market, certainly competent, would thrive in a West Coast offense under Alex Van Pelt. Now, Cousins probably going back to Minnesota if I had to guess right now, or maybe some other team will try to poach him. But I wouldn't be shocked if the Patriots really went after him. There's also Baker Mayfield. He worked with Van Pelt for a few seasons with the Cleveland Browns. Van Pelt won a playoff game with him in 2020 that I mentioned, 48 points. And, Baker has earned being, a mid-tier NFL starting quarterback. I think he'll get a real contract for his next team. Maybe he'll work with Van Pelt again. I guess the two have a good relationship, so that's a real possibility, although I think Tampa will want to bring Baker Mayfield back. There's also Joe Flacco. He's a free agent now. He was signed for $2.5 million this past year. Probably will demand a little more money considering his success with Cleveland this past season. But Flacco would obviously be a short-term solution, a bridge to the future quarterback. But I think you're going to get a lot better play out of him than we've seen in New England under Mac Jones and certainly under Cam Newton. But there is the possibility they just want to run it back with Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi. I know a lot of fans are not excited about that possibility, but perhaps Van Pelt would be able to revive Mac Jones, at least bring back the rookie Mac Jones, and hopefully Mac uses this offseason to try to fix those mistakes, which are really more mental than anything. Obviously, Mac does not have the strongest arm, but he is a good quarterback when he's in it, when he has his confidence, certainly can go through the reads, go through the progression, and make the correct throws. Very accurate quarterback. And Zappi showed a few good things, right? I mean, he did not look great. His first game against, what was it? It was the Chargers, yeah, where they didn't put up any points and then struggled in the snow against the Jets the last game of the season. So maybe Zappi's not the guy either, but it's possible they want to run it back with them and get a quarterback later on. But I would expect the Patriots are still eyeing the number 3 overall pick. Jayden Daniels, probably less so. Drake May, if he's available, or maybe they opt for a Michael Penix or a J.J. McCarthy or a Bo Nix in the second or third round. We'll have to see. But the free agents, especially Baker Mayfield, especially Joe Flacco, maybe even Kirk Cousins, are all real possibilities at this point. But only time will tell to see who they bring in. Now, everyone that has worked with Van Pelt absolutely loves the guy. He's a great, positive communicator, really does a great job of leading team meetings, setting up a great offensive game plan, and getting the most out of his players. So you ask around the league, people that have worked with Van Pelt, they're all very excited for him and think, especially with play calling duties, he's really going to thrive in New England. I think the most important vacancy at this point on the Patriots coaching staff is the offensive line coach. The rumor is the Patriots are chasing Andy Dickerson, a former Seahawks and Rams assistant, and also spent the last couple of seasons as the offensive line coach for the Seahawks. He also interviewed for offensive coordinator jobs with the Browns and Bengals a few weeks ago. So people think very highly of Andy Dickerson, probably a future offensive coordinator somewhere else. But if you bring him in as the offensive line coach, that is certainly going to be an improvement from Adrian Clem, who, safe to say, was very underwhelming this past season. A little more information on Dickerson. He does have some ties to the Boston area, went to Tufts University, played football at Tufts. He also interned for the Patriots operations department in 2004 and eventually became a formal staffer a season later. Patriots won Super Bowls then. And then he became a coaching assistant with the Jets for 3 seasons after, and has had a long coaching career and certainly has done a great job as offensive line coach with the Seahawks. Really doing a good job with Geno Smith and giving him the protection he needs to throw the football. Would be very happy to see Dickerson hired to that role, and apparently people seem to think he's the favorite and will thrive working alongside Van Pelt. So more on that later. We'll see what happens with that search. Overall, Alex Van Pelt, is this the most exciting hire? No. Surprising? Yes, considering we hadn't heard anything about him until he was hired. I feel a little bit better that he has a lot of experience relative to Nick Caley, the presumed favorite, who really only had worked as a tight ends coach in New England and with the Rams this past season. So they're going to get some experience, which they really need, considering Jerod Mayo has only coached and played on the defensive side of the football. So it's going to be Alex Van Pelt's offense, and we'll see what happens. Really excited that he can coach quarterbacks, and there's a lot of upside to him calling plays, considering he put up 48 points in a playoff game, filling in for Kevin Stefanski a few seasons ago. Can run the offensive side of the football and really take the weight off of Jerod Mayo there, who can focus more big picture, high level on the offensive side and really continue to thrive coaching the defensive side, which he has done over the last 4 to 5 seasons. I was certainly open to the idea of Josh McDaniels coming back. I don't think if McDaniels had come back, we would see the old Erhardt Perkins. I think it would have been a little bit of hybrid between the West Coast Shanahan or maybe the old school West Coast of Van Pelt and the old McDaniels offense. But clearly Mayo wanted to go a very different direction and bring in someone that is going to completely uplift and change this offense. So things are going to look a lot different in New England. Let me know how you feel about the Alex Van Pelt hire. Are you excited about it? And also let me know in the comments, who would you like to see at quarterback? Do you think they should still opt for Drake May or Jaden Daniels in the draft? Pick one of the quarterbacks later in the draft. Bo Nix and Michael Penix will be in the Senior Bowl. Penix looked a lot better in practices this week. I broke that down a little bit on the podcast earlier this week, so be sure to check that out. But let me know what you think about Van Pelt and the quarterback situation going forward. Be sure to like this video and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And we'll be back next week with more Patriots coverage.